Hey everyone, welcome to r/Tales from Tech Support, where we get to have a little chuckle at the technologically disadvantaged, like me. I'm Uncle Reddit, and have I got a story for you. Long ago in the caveman era, mid-range IBM server, why are you rebooting a server at high noon? Short explanation of the environment. Early 1990s, when I was working at IBM's tech support for their AS400 series, a mid-range server system, multi-user, and can have anywhere from 2 to well over 200 hard drives and terabytes of data, large for the 90s. A few terms may be needed to help the story. IPL, Initial Program Load, is basically either powering up or a reboot. Retain, IBM's master worldwide system of problem/incident recording, notes, etc. with records entered by each tech as they work with the clients. All are companies, not individuals. IBM runs 3 shifts in tech support daily. I work the late second, early third shift. A notification came in on Retain, message CPF 9999 on damaged object X in library Y from customer. This was about 8:30 p.m. on a Wednesday. I'm in the middle of second shift and it seemed to be a fairly normal call. Usually if it's a program, recompile it or restore it from a backup. If it's parts of the operating system, fixing stuff like this requires either tweaking the actual objects by a developer signed on remotely or reinstalling part of the operating system, partially or fully. When the call came in, I noticed that the problem record had originated in Retain a little bit after noon today. There were about 10 recurrences of this customer coming in all afternoon on the same problem record. All were in regards to damaged or missing objects. Why so many? Each technician before me just handled each individual issue, either restoring, recompiling, or tweaking objects. But I noticed something at the very top entry, the first call on the record. Damaged object found at IPL. Wait, this record originated around noon, and it was an error occurring during an IPL? A reboot or powering up the system? What's a business or any organization doing reboot at high noon on a typical business day? Usually a company will have their systems down for maintenance and or backups, like at night or on the weekend or both. So this seemed quite odd to me. Even more odd and coincidental, they had many calls this afternoon. I brought over my manager and had him on the phone call with the client, and I sheepishly asked the client, what was going on at the time you were IPLing the system? Long, awkward pause. We had a disk crash. In today's parlance, it was a facepalm event. If the first technician, or any of them after that, would have asked that basic question, what led to this, the proper answer would be a full restore of the system from backup. The restore process could take anywhere from 3 to 12 hours, or more. But at the rate this client was going, he'd probably tie us up for the whole next week getting assistance, trying to piece together missing and damaged objects. We got them going on doing a partial restore of the system and ran a checking function for missing and damaged objects. At least I got a few attaboys for having the presence of mind to look at the forest, not the individual trees. Yeah, sometimes you get so caught up in trying to fix the immediate problem that I think a lot of us tend to not look back to why did that problem occur to begin with. Why are you using a candle? This story is from years ago when I provided tech support for a company of cheap PC clones that are no longer available in the United States, but which are still sold in other parts of the world. Now, to say that many of the purchasers of these computers were first-time users is a vast understatement of the case. Many of my best stories from this time come from the nexus between bad hardware design, cheap customer service solutions, and insanely novice users. So sit right back and I'll tell you a tale of the mythical creature known as the user and his capricious and unpredictable ways. First, the usual disclaimers. I'm on a computer, so completely responsible for the formatting. English is both my first and third language, and my mother was a school teacher, so I'm also completely responsible for my use of grammar and spelling, although I do not care to hear about it if the spelling tends to vacillate between British and American standards. Today's call you will never forget. On this call, the caller complains that his computer no longer boots up. In checking his specs, I note that it's one of the notorious riser board units. These are designed to use smaller motherboard than most computers of the day, and this is done by only having one expansion slot on the motherboard, and then inserting into this slot a riser board with 5 or 6 expansion slots on it. This basically moves most of the expansion slot portion of the motherboard onto a daughter board and changes the space requirements to make the computer smaller. But in order to make the expansion slots on the daughter board compatible with all the cards out there are massive data and power connections between these two boards, resulting in an unstable situation where if the daughter board shifts even a very small amount in its slot, it'll ground out the entire computer and leave it unable to boot. The solution? The correct solution would be to send a technician on site and have them remove and reinstall the daughter board and thus get the computer running again. The cheap customer service solution we're given instead is to walk the user through the process of opening the ridiculously complicated case, identifying the riser board, use a screwdriver to remove it, and then reinsert it, put everything back together, and hope it now works. Often it was a rinse-repeat sort of thing where the second or third time is the charm. These calls take a ridiculous amount of time and tend to make users uncomfortable as they're being called on to basically perform heart surgery on their computer. Never wanting to assume the hardest solution first, I start with the basic things like checking if the computer is plugged into the wall, and having the user unplug the power cord from the back of the computer and from the wall and reconnect it to make sure it isn't loose anywhere. We also check the power and connection to the monitor to make sure nothing is hinky there. And so we step through all the basic troubleshooting, and it's now time to tackle the dreaded riser board issue. With more than the normal level of difficulty, we get the case open. I'm now describing the internals of the computer to him to help identify the motherboard and riser board. And the user says, "Hang on, I don't want to drip wax into the computer." Me: "I'm sorry, did you say wax?" Befuddled user: "Yeah, I'm using a candle to light the inside of the case." Me: "Why are you using a candle?" Befuddled user: "Because the power's out." Me: Facepalm: "Did it not occur to you that you would need power to use the computer?" Befuddled user: "Sure, but it has a battery in it." And indeed it does. A watch battery. A battery just strong enough to help the computer not forget the date and time when turned off and unplugged. And even so, these normally need to be replaced about once a year or the computer forgets what day it is. I explain this to the user, but he doesn't want any part of it. He wants the computer to work during a power outage off of a small watch battery. I apologize that I can't help him with that, and then help him put the case back together again, after which he asked to talk to my supervisor. This was easy to accomplish. My supervisor and about 3 other people had been listening in on the call after it started to go long, and well before we determined the source of his trouble was a power outage. They're still listening and generally having a good laugh at the befuddled user's expense. The supervisor comes and listens to the user's complaint, which isn't about me, he likes me, but all about the computer not working when the power's out. It was voted call of the week. I don't know, man. It just seems so obvious to me. The power goes out, electronics don't work. And if he didn't know how to work with the motherboard and get the case open and all that, how did he know there was a battery in there? I still don't understand. Computer says, no signal. Back in the mid-2000s, I was technically an intern building PCs at a small computer shop, but in reality, I did everything from picking up parts from our supplier to shipping and dealing with customers and troubleshooting, and even did the weekly garbage run. It was around the time when many businesses here in Norway started to move their stuff from physical locations to online services, everything from banks to government functions, and lots of people were starting to pick up their first PC out of necessity rather than interest. I get to work and find that I have a build order for one of our basic PCs. I build it, test it, pack it up, and call the customers, as they wanted to pick it up at the store. I happened to be at the front desk when they came to pick it up, and it turned out to be an elderly couple, so I offered to put everything in their car for them. Those cheap steel boxes were heavy back then. Apparently they would get help to set it up at home. Just as I'm about to leave work for the day, I get called to the office and I'm told there's a problem with the computer I built earlier that day. The elderly couple is on the phone and I take the call. Me: "Hi, I heard you were having a problem with your new computer?" Them: "Yes, you forgot to include the antenna." Me: I'm pretty sure there wasn't supposed to be an antenna. It didn't have Wi-Fi." Them: "There has to be. The computer says it isn't getting a signal." Me: "Did you connect everything? Are all the lights on? Did you figure out all the cables?" Them: "Yes, everything's connected. It's just not getting the signal." I'm not a phone support guy, and this elderly couple doesn't appear to be sufficiently comfortable with this new contraption to go through troubleshooting by phone anyway. I also know it'll be a hassle for them to pack everything back up and return to the store. Normal store procedure. I asked them where they live, and it's not a terrible detour from my drive home, so I offer to drop by and take a look. When I get there, everything looks fine at first glance, until I realize that the tower isn't anywhere to be found. The monitor's saying no signal, because there's nothing, other than the mouse and the keyboard plugged into the integrated USB hub connected to it. Me, hey, where's the PC? Them, blank stare. Me, the big black box? Them, oh, so there is something missing. I then remember that I carried everything to their car, put the monitor and accessories in the back seat, and put the PC itself in the trunk. I go out to their car, find the PC where I left it, and bring it inside. A couple minutes later it's running and I get it connected to their internet service. I realize that they'll need a bit of a crash course to get started, and I offer to show them how the basics work. They gladly accept but insist on serving me dinner first. I got home pretty late that day, but I never charged them anything for it. The food was good, they were nice, and for years afterwards they'd send their friends and family to our shop to buy computers. It's kind of refreshing to read this kind of story once in a while, where, the users are they're clueless, but they're innocently clueless, and we've got a tech who's willing to go above and beyond to make sure that they're happy and everything's functioning. For Failsafe, you need at least 2 single points of failure. Some background. The tale takes place on a semi-academic site with some centralized IT services. ISP, mail, the basic DNS, and backbone network. The rest is managed by the institutes housed on the campus. You can buy in everything, domain, server housing, storage, etc. from our central IT, but it's not cheap. Also, if you use their equipment, you have to play by their rules. We have 100 users. I'm responsible for nearly everything in our institute when it comes to the infrastructure. I'm basically a janitor with an engineering degree and a bit too much knowledge about IT, construction, building infrastructure, and our software that we use. However, the IT should be managed by someone else. Let's call him Uncle Dagobert. Uncle Dagobert has a healthy aversion against investing some money in our infrastructure for the IT. He's also our CFO acting, and he doesn't like the rules from the IT department. Most of our work consists of field simulations of various RF components and working with AI for pattern recognition and so on, so the car can tell if it's about to hit a pedestrian, another car, or a lamppost. The standard issue gear consists of Core i5 PCs with onboard graphic cards. We have 10 servers for heavy workloads, but because they needed to be cheap, so a server is normally something like a Xeon with 8 cores at 3 GHz and one lonely mid-grade NVIDIA gaming graphics card. Uncle Dagobert doesn't want to hear the constant whining of the users, so if there's a problem with the PCs, he normally gives me the order to fix it. That way he's not bothered with the standard problems like a broken monitor or that someone wiped his hard drive when he wanted to format a USB stick. Yes, every user has admin rights on his or her boxes because Uncle Dagobert also can't be bothered with installing software, and he's the boss of the IT. Also, the users normally come to me because they know the reactions. If there's a more serious problem, I give him a ticket with the issue and what needs to be done. For example, if the nifty new AI software doesn't want to use the graphics card on the user's box, and the CPU is working to its lonely and hot death. Solution? Buy and install a compatible graphics card, because onboard Intel graphics does not go well with NVIDIA CUDA, or buy time on one of the clusters. The typical answer to my tickets is, we don't need that because it works since 10 years that way and the users just need to simplify their work. Use the servers. Yeah, right. Because a €50 card will help with analyzing some 100 gigabytes of LiDAR data. All the servers are housed in a server room, which is a co-location space. It was an unused space in the basement of another building. I had planned the structure of the room to make it a decent server closet, but most of my plans got rejected because it cost too much. In retrospect, perhaps we could have opted out of the fire suppression system because data centers don't burn, right? But at least 2 independent power supply legs, redundant uplink to the backbone net, a UPS with generator backup, and redundant cooling would be nice to have. I covered my back with some paper and moved on, because Uncle Dagobert told me that the servers are his domain. Yes, boss man. About 2 years later, I come to work at 7. Enough time to do all the administrative work and start the important projects before the first users come to work at 9. I found 2 emails from our workshop crew that they can't access our shared network drives and the internet. Okay, perhaps just a defective network card. We'll look into it later. Not shortly after the first call, the internet is down. Strange. I have access. Both users are on the same switch, and so am I. So I go to the user's PC and make some tests. DNS not found. Wait. It's not the standard DNS, but an IP from our network. Reset the DNS to the standard. Internet's working again. User is happy. I go back and run some tests. It looks like all of our servers have vanished, and that's a problem because nearly everything runs through them. Licenses, printing services, the whole Active Directory, the user's data, and for some reason since yesterday, most of the DNS queries. Luckily, mail is centralized, so no problem there. Also, all my data is hosted at the central IT because I like my data backed up and ready. I really hate redoing engineering work because of data loss. So I write a ticket for Uncle Dagobert that there's a problem with the server room and that he needs to come in because it's not my domain. Some users become unhappy because they can't work, aka surfing the net while waiting for results. So I write a mail to all that we have a problem with our servers and I can't say how long the outage will be. 8 o'clock, Uncle Dagobert arrived, and he is not happy because he didn't plan to come in this day, and he's sure that I made a mistake. Uncle Dagobert, the system worked for years. It's a failsafe because if something failed, the monitoring system would have told me. The monitoring system was one of the first victims. It died with the server it was housed on. All our servers are dead. I checked it, and I want to have the day off because I couldn't work. The license for our simulations tools. Uncle Dagobert, but you maintain the electric systems in the network. Yes, but the problems are in the servers and the server room. It's not my responsibility. Our boss told me in writing that it's your responsibility because you wanted it that way. Have fun. In the end, I helped him because a failed 20 kVA UPS is something you should know what to do. Well, it wasn't just the UPS which committed suicide, but the failing cooling system assisted it. The outage lasted over 1 day. Uncle Dagobert was mad because his failsafe system had failed. We did a post-mortem single point of failure analysis of the setup. All of our services were bundled on one flimsy server, which was virtualized into 5 to 8 servers. The experimental DNS, DHCP, Active Directory, license servers, printing server, the user data, and so on. The host server's drive consisted of roughly 10 drives in one RAID. There is a backup. On a tape library which overwrites an LTO7 tape over and over. There was no mirror server which could switch over. Single uplink to one top of the rack switch. The top of the rack switch was linked to another 10 gig fiber switch, which is just one 10G fiber uplink to the backbone. The original plan required 2x12 fiber patch panel setup directly linked to the backbone net of the campus and at least redundant uplinks. But costs. The AC was not a redundant precision cooling system, but just some domestic cold water radiator with fans. Oh, so basically a swamp cooler. The redundant power distribution with one UPS and one generator leg was just a cable, which ended in the dying UPS. The manual bypass was never installed, so the UPS could not safely be bypassed without cutting power. Also, the UPS was housed in the same room, because UPS likes it cool. And who needs an additional AC if we could just use that one? And even if we had 2 independent power sources, it would not have helped at all, because all our servers and the main switch had just one power supply. But heck, who could afford €200 for the second power supply? We're on a budget. Better cut off 100, expensive, people from their data and ability to work for the day. And the kicker? Physical security of the rack was top notch. No one bothered to change the locks from the standard Riddle 3524 key. Now everything is fine. The UPS got a manual bypass, and the monitoring system is mirrored on another server in another room with all the really important services like DHCP and DNS. This time, no costs were cut, and a little Raspberry Pi blinks happily in UD's office and tells him that the system works. The rest of it? Well, that's all way too expensive, because we have the monitoring system. Also, we eliminated 2 single points of failure, so the system is failsafe, right? Well, it sounds to me like Uncle was just trying to find any way possible to keep from being bothered with any kind of task or work. Of course, if he really wanted to do that, he would have kind of blown the budget out a little bit and made sure everything really was a failsafe system. Well, thanks for hanging out with me today, guys. If you've enjoyed this content, would you consider doing me a favor? Would you maybe give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and maybe click that little bell icon so you don't miss the fat guy with the beard telling you stories. See ya!